visakar. So the question that I read before everything went crazy was from Karina, asking, is gossip ever a good thing? So that's a really important question. For those who don't know, the 5 precepts in Buddhism, the 4th is not to lie. And usually that's expanded. People will usually speak about the other qualities of wrong speech. So in the Buddhist conception, wrong speech usually is composed of lying, sampapalapa, which is a great word, which means frivolous chatter. And it's one of those onomatopoeic words in the Pali language. So sampapalapa. So that's useless speech that doesn't lead anywhere. You then have, let me turn off this thing that's up there. Okay, so sampapalapa, frivolous chatter. Then you have slanderous speech, or gossip, basically. It's true, but it's about basically divisive. It's divisive speech, speaking behind someone's back. And then the 4th is harsh speech, so stuff that comes across in a harsh way. And the only one that's explicitly in the precept, one of the precepts which are the moral backbone of a human being in the Buddhist conception. And the Buddha said that one who doesn't keep these 5 precepts digs up the roots of their humanity. So they're just considered these are very basic things, and they're not easy to keep. But this one's really beautiful, is not to lie, ever. And the reason it's in the precept is because it is a non-negotiable. There's room in many situations for not saying everything you're thinking, or for being very skillful in how you say something. There's even rooms at time to be, there's situations where there's information that shouldn't be shared, and finding ways to be skillful. It's a skill to develop. Like, how do you maintain that sense of honesty, or never utter a falsehood? And there's benefit in that, because, if your partner asks, if someone knows that you will never directly lie to them, then if something goes badly and your partner asks, have you been faithful to me? And you say, yes, I have, then they can take that and they know it's worth everything, because they know that you would never utter a direct lie. So even if there's room within that precept for skill and some, you have to be careful around these things. But that's why that 4th precept of not lying is a precept, and that it should not be broken ever. And over time, that knowledge that you will never lie gives rise to a profound sense of self-worth in a wholesome way. There's a phrase in the suttas I reference a lot that says, one becomes sensitive to the pleasure of being blameless. And that phrase has rung for me year after year, louder and louder, as I felt more and more that I understood what it meant. In that when there is that blameless sense, there's a purity and a beauty in that. And it's interesting, in all the Jataka tales, the tales of the Buddha's lives prior to his awakening, he is learning, so he makes many mistakes. But the one thing he never does during all of those eons of wandering in these stories is he never lies. And there's something powerful about that, in the sense of not lying to oneself being a prerequisite for learning. So it's almost as if all those lifetimes were this tool taken to shape one into a better being, but that those could only serve as such if one was being completely honest with oneself. And that's how you take experience as a guide and a teacher to make and shape one into a better tool of care and compassion. So I think it's interesting that honesty precept is so central, and it's the one that the Bodhisattva never broke in all of those stories. The reason that the other three forms of wrong speech, sampapalapa, idle chatter, divisive speech, and harsh speech, are not included in that precept is that there are times for them. So divisive speech, which is gossip, there are times in life when it is genuinely necessary to talk or warn someone about someone else. If someone's doing something dangerous and someone's drawing close to them in a way that's not good for them, then there's a place for telling them about that. So that's why it's not in the precept in the sense of something that's forever and completely off the table. And that's why in that sense, gossip, there are situations where it's okay in that sense. That being said, that's very rare. And how most of us use gossip is much different. And I think we all know that. Of all the precepts and of all the things that we do wrong and that cause that sense of nausea that comes from knowing that we've transgressed, the issue of gossip is perhaps the most difficult for us to keep, but it has real and damaging effects. And I'm always reminded of Saint Teresa of Avila, who had made the determination to never say something about another person that she would not say in front of them. So I don't think that would be a Buddhist, a necessary determination for a Buddhist, in the sense that, like I said, there's situations where it's appropriate to speak about a dangerous person to another. But I think that general trajectory and that goal is useful. And I think one useful way to work with that is, before you say something about another person that you wouldn't say in front of them, to very explicitly mark that. Say, I have a determination to not say things about others that I wouldn't say in front of them, but I need to make an exception right now. And then you say what you need to say. But that way you're making a very clear delineation between what is right and what's absolutely necessary, and when you're just drifting into defilement and the desire to connect with someone over chatting about the neighbors. And while gossiping about the neighbors does give that short-term bond, it, on a deeper level, tears you apart from someone, because you know that they will talk about you. And I've met monks who just don't do it. And I trust them so much because I know that they will never talk badly about me. And Ajahn Pasano at Abhayagiri, the abbot, is renowned for this. He will not gossip. And just to really quickly speak to those other two forms of wrong speech, the admonition against harsh speech, I think that wasn't included in the precept because there are situations where harsh speech is useful. I think most of us don't almost ever encounter that situation, but there are teachers who they use the wrathful persona very effectively. And as a young junior monk, and still, I have been, it's one of the privileges you get when you become a disciple of a senior teacher, is you get hit by the Dharma 2x4 fairly frequently. And it's a privilege in its own right, but it's usually teachings that are direct and pointed and cut the defilement right away. And there's a place for them, and it makes you humble. And finally, the wrong speech form of sampapalapa, idle chatter, I believe that that's not included in the precept explicitly as always wrong, because it's useful. Frequently monks will enter the robes, or nuns, and you're so idealistic about it, and you never want to say anything that is not explicitly Dhamma or Dhamma discussion. And that gets really hard to just have a conversation with anyone, and things get quite serious. So there's a room for a certain amount of grease on the gears of society, and making small, a bit of idle chatter or light talk is fine. But you just keep an eye for when that grease begins to gum the wheels, and you can feel it. I remember one of the more revealing experiences I had right before ordaining was I went on a long ski with my parents, sort of a long multi-day cross-country kind of backcountry thing over the glaciers, and we were stuck in this hut. And I just remember people talking about outdoor gear for maybe 2 hours straight, three maybe. And I just felt like jumping out the window. So, I mean, after you get a feel for what it means to have real conversation with people, which so frequently can take the form of asking and listening. And I've heard someone say that right speech almost always can take the form of questions. And I think that's a useful guide. It's not always right, but it's a useful guide. But once you get the feel of what that means in a conversation, in a relationship, so many of the other things people talk about seem fragmented and fragmenting. And you learn to withdraw from them slowly. So that's a long answer, but that issue of wrong speech is fascinating. So yes, there is a place for gossip in the sense of talking about or warning others at times. The one piece of speech that there's never room for is lying. Okay, we're joined by others. We have Geetha, or Geeta. I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. Oh, the gossip question was from Sujata. Sorry. Sorry, Karina. Sorry, Sujata. And Dave. Hello, Dave. Hello, Allison. Is right view so overarching that committed adherence is the main key to avoiding rebirth? Does it directly influence all other behaviors and karma? Is it enough in itself? Whoa. Let me think about that one. In a sense, yes. There's a sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 117, called the the Great 40, I'll say in English. And it speaks about the Noble Eightfold Path in a very interesting way. It says that right concentration is the heart of the Eightfold Path, but that the forerunner of all path factors is right view. And then it goes through all the path factors and says, how is right view the forerunner? One discerns right view is right view and wrong view is wrong view. And right intention is right intention and wrong intention as wrong intention. And then it says, and then one applies one's effort to abandon wrong view and embark in right view. And one keeps mindfulness, knowing this is right view, this is wrong view. And these three path factors, right view, right mindfulness, and right effort, circle around each other path factor. So what that means for me is that, yes, when one has right view, and it is the first in the Noble Eightfold Path, then because essentially one of the liminal places in the Buddha's path to enlightenment, he characterizes as the beginning to divide his thoughts into two categories: skillful, which are ones that are based on non-greed, non-delusion, non-hatred, and those based on greed, hatred, and delusion, those that are unskillful. Or I'm sorry, those that were skillful were based on thoughts of not sensual desire, not ill will, not harmfulness, ahimsa. And those that were unskillful were ones based on sensual desire, harmfulness, and ill will. And he divided those two and pursued one and not the other, and cultivated one and not the other. So essentially, with right view, you take the mind and every action and see it as primarily a act of intention. And by discerning the quality of that intention behind it, which frequently can take the form, and I've mentioned this before, of the quality of the voice telling you or urging you to do that action. The defilements speak with an oily, snake oil salesman kind of voice. And the good qualities, the bright voice, is calm and centered. And if you listen to the tone of voice in your head, you will hear a difference. So when you follow the bright voice, and when every action is taken as a chance to shape oneself, then all other path factors have a chance to develop in all actions and through all actions. That sutta really came together for me when I heard Ajahn Jeff speak about right attention, which is one of the prerequisites for moving towards enlightenment, stream entry. The term is yoniso manasikara, which means yoniso is related to the word for womb, and manasikara means action of the mind. Manas, kara. Manas is mind, kara is action. And it's right attention. It's attention that goes right to the point, and at its most basic level, it implies attention to the Four Noble Truths. So all that academic talk is just to say that when these three path factors, right view, right mindfulness, and right effort, come together and circle around every other path factor, that's holding that path factor in right attention. And the Buddha speaks about right attention, where we turn our gaze, as the essential element in developing or letting the heart shrivel. And it makes all the difference. If we there's a great phrase by a philosopher that says, evil lies in the gaze that sees evil all around it. Good, and I think a good counterpart to that would be that good lies in the gaze that sees good around it. And that's a limited and broad stroke conception. Obviously, we don't want to turn a blind eye to what evil there is in the world. But I'm constantly astounded by, this is one of the issues with becoming addicted to news, is reading, checking your iPhone for the news 5 or 10 or 20 times a day. And we constantly forget the bright garden our hands work in, and the beauty of relationships around us, and the lovely people, and the metta and love that hold this world together. We forget that bright garden for the vague and faint whisper of a serpent. And that is a tragedy, and it will change the heart little by little. So what do we give our attention to? And yes, when one approaches every situation with right intention, you can always find Dhamma in everything. Whether it's a difficult situation or a good situation, there's always a way of looking at it that's a lesson in Dhamma, and which gives rise to wholesome states. And this can be most simply thought of in the sense that right view at its most basic level is seeing the Four Noble Truths. So in every mind state, in every situation, you find the coarse element in it, or the difficult part, and you let go. And you see where you're attaching to it, either aversively or in a greedy sense, either pushing it away or pulling it towards. And then when you see that and relinquish the clinging, there comes a moment of peace. And then from that still spot, you develop the Eightfold Noble Path. And that's how you develop in the practice. And that doesn't mean you accept everything that comes your way, but it means that instead of reacting instinctively to difficult situations or good situations, you respond skillfully to them. So instead of coming into a difficult situation and just making a break for it, you might be in that dangerous situation and sort of see the difficulty in it and come to a place of centeredness, and then the voice inside you might say, get out, and then you get out. But it's a whole different thing if it comes from, and that's a difficult situation. Sometimes if you're in a dangerous place, obviously just get out. But in most places in our lives, there's room to take stock and to stop, and then to develop our action in line with the Eightfold Noble Path and with Dhamma. And that's how right attention and right view, in the sense of seeing the Four Noble Truths and their incumbent duties, can change everything in life into the path. We are constantly told by the Buddha to turn towards and taste and comprehend. Taste might be a strange word. To comprehend our suffering. We're constantly told to see our clinging. We're constantly told to notice and make much of the peace in our hearts when it comes. And then we are constantly encouraged to develop this path. All right. Yes, Sujata, I'm glad that's the speech thing was helpful, and the exceptions. Yes, I mean they're there. Yeah, it does happen. But I think that way of sort of bounding them with a, when you say depart from right speech in some way, shape, or form, to make note of it. Say, I'm going to say something now that I usually would not say, but I feel like I need to, and then say what you're going to say. And that way it really bounds it and lets gossip not get out of hand. Karina says, I've been contemplating the idea you mentioned yesterday about asking questions instead of giving advice. It's really helped with reading the suttas. Thank you. Any more ideas around it? So what Karina is referencing is in the talk yesterday, Sunday's talk, I spoke about a few things around listening and questioning. In one of the suttas, the Buddha says the strength of one with Dhamma is the ability to listen to Dhamma and gain joy in it, and their enthusiasm for it. And I love that conception of strength. And it reminded me of a quote of someone who asked Mother Teresa what she did when she prayed. And she said, I don't say anything, I listen. And they asked what God said to her. And she said, he just listens back. And I once I knew of someone who said that right speech could almost always be in the form of questions, implying that usually asking people about their experience is much more useful than giving advice, and is almost never wrong if they're the right questions. It reminded me of Ajahn Chah was noted for not always giving straight answers. And he would frequently say, if you didn't know the answer already, you wouldn't be able to ask the question. I think that's not always true across the board in every sense. And yet there is something to be said for much of the Dhamma is very simple, and people do know themselves better than they think. But giving people a chance to articulate and to listen to themselves is such a gift. And frequently that's enough. I mean, it's one of the important things of meditation is you're just listening to yourself for a while, both your neurotic voices and your defiled voices, and the voice in you, which is transcendent of both. And you hear them and then you put them aside. And sometimes all they needed was to be heard before they will be quieter. And I think that any more ideas around it? I also mentioned how in meditation, we're frequently told to kind of direct our experience through what's called directed thought and evaluation, which is a verbal admonition to ourselves, such as be with the breath. But I found that asking questions or phrasing those verbal directions as questions is very much more effective for modern people, because we are so overzealous at first, and our effort tends towards aggression so easily that instead of admonishing ourselves to do this or that, asking a question and letting the body and the mind respond naturally, it's gentler and it serves the same purpose. So saying, what sort of breath feels good now? How can I feel love right now? How can I remain with the breath? Can I remain with the breath? Questioning works. And I think also, I know of one person who would go from city to city and set up a stall. And just on the front of the stall, I think it said, willing to listen. And, I think the idea was that people just came and spilled everything. And some people have waited. We don't realize what a gift the practice is to people, because some people have never or almost never get the chance to be with another person who's really present with them and sees them. So many people walk through the world looking at others as shadows or things to gain something from, or to push away, or to mold. And to be really seen is a enormous gift, and that's what the practice lets us do for others. Is when we cultivate mindfulness and a center and skill in meditation, not only do we gain an inner resource that lets us no longer feed off of others, because we have an internal happiness which is independent of them. And therefore we can really be with someone just as they are and love them in a liberative way. Because true love is to let someone be, or to encourage someone towards being the best they can be. And yet, so often that consists of giving them the space to discover themselves and to give them that attention, which is sacred. The Buddha said that those who are mindful are truly alive, whereas those who live without mindfulness are as if dead already. So there's something, I don't know a better word than sacred, about the quality of attention. And if you can give that to someone, that's what practice lets you do for someone. So when you go off to your room to cultivate that quiet space in your life, it's not a selfish thing. You're preparing your heart to truly give the most sweet and subtle gift you can give to another person, to listen and to see them. So Dave just commented that then right view is focused through the lens of the Four Noble Truths. That's beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, I'm most glad that it helped. And I also found that conception of right view very helpful. There's two levels of right view. There's mundane and super mundane, worldly and spiritual, basically. So the Buddha said mundane right view is the belief in karma. There is what is given. There is mother and father, in the sense of these relationships that are deeply special and meaningful. And multiple lives, births, things like this. A lot of us as Westerners have trouble with some of those. The belief in karma is central, though, the ability to change ourselves through our intentional action. But the transcendent right view, spiritual right view, at its most incisive, is the Four Noble Truths, and seeing everything in those terms. And there's a beautiful sutta called the Kachanagota Sutta, where the Buddha says, one who sees this, their knowledge is independent of others. This, I say, is right view. So it's a developed skill, but yes, that is vijja, knowledge. Ignorance is ignorance of the Four Noble Truths at its most basic. Dave asks, can we ever really give too much through listening? What about friends who are constantly in crisis and seem to have no end to needing to vent? That's a great question. Good caveat. Let me think about it. Yeah, yeah, we can give too much, I think. And sometimes listening to someone constantly as they vent is not helpful. And I think part of that, though, is the Buddha said that the Four Noble Truths are useful to use in our experience. So to review, that the directive of the First Noble Truth is to turn towards our suffering and to comprehend it. But this can be applied in an external way too, where you see something wrong or difficult in the world, wrong in the sense of it, a defilement manifesting externally in another person, in a social movement, whatever. And I've found that the way to help the heart accept that is to trace it back to the initiating wound, because all such movements of the heart are initiated through suffering. We're wounded and we're fleeing pain, and so we do wrong. So if someone's constantly venting, they're trying to get rid of a pain, of something difficult, or they're running from that or distracting themselves from it. And if they keep on venting and there just comes a point where it's no longer helpful and you feel that, then really looking at them no longer means just listening to them as they talk about something that's not the real issue. Real attention in that case, yoniso manasikara, right attention, radical attention, means looking at what the real issue is, really seeing them. And really seeing them in that situation does not mean hearing the story about their boss who made them stay overtime one more day. Right attention in that case means seeing the person sitting in front of you who is stretched to the brink, who is hurting deeply. And to the greater extent you can see their conditionality in its wholeness, the more compassion you'll be able to feel for them. So if you not only see that person who's tired and hurting, but you see the child who struggled for approval by trying to please their father constantly, and now that's transferred to their current work situation. You have to know someone very well before that, and yet such looking can steer a conversation, because then you start asking the right questions. I mean, there's a place to disengage too if they're just not interested in going there, or if your resources are dried up, or maybe you have someplace to be. But if you are in a conversation, you can direct someone to the real issue. And if they're willing to touch that pain and speak to it, then every conversation has a path to, or most conversations, has a path to true meaning. And that's real listening, because you're listening to what's below the surface, below the words. I know that Ajahn Sucitto has said that self-compassion at its heart is understanding one's conditionality. And I found this to be true, is that all of our neuroses, all of our awkwardness and brokenness, what seems wrong in someone, if you find out where they come from and what made them like that, there's always that moment. And I think we all have this experience where you're like, oh, I get it. How could I possibly blame them for that? And I lived with a monk for years who I've mentioned him before. I mentioned him because he was one of my best teachers and is a friend now. Best teachers in the sense that I took it as a teaching. And he had a lot of difficulty with this environment being just so, and constantly trying to steer my actions so that I would do this just this way. And then I learned about his childhood, about certain tendencies in him, about the suffering he endured by constantly needing to have everything just this way. And then I no longer saw it as wrong. It was still hard, but your heart opens when you turn towards the First Noble Truth. So, in one sutta, the Buddha says that things have their origin in feeling. feeling, suffering in this case. So you can trace things back to suffering. And when you do that, it's not this dour admonition, it's the place where grace can manifest, and it's the opening to compassion. And for me, this really works with social, with oneself as well. If you these sankharas, we call them in Buddhism, these programs, these personality patterns we manifest, the tendency when you walk into a party to be the most outgoing, center of attention. And there's a lot of suffering in that, especially if it's the only way we know how to be. And we know, for example, that we shouldn't always be doing that. And we know it's not right. But, and this is a minor example, you can take much more brutal examples of sankhara, of conditioning, of programs, the tendency to look for excitement and therefore you cheat on a partner or to lie or to steal. But what feels so wrong and what we destroy ourselves over, especially as Westerners, when you look back at where those things came from, the conditioning behind them, everything changes. So to see, I seek to be the center of attention, I get why, because I grew up in a family of 5 children, and I had to be the center of attention to gain any sense of love or attention from my parents. When you trace back your strangeness, your suffering to those initial causes, when you see the initial wound, when you see those programs as things that have helped you survive as a child, then instead of pushing them away and feeling that they're wrong, you understand where they came from and you can thank them for saving you and also say, I don't need you anymore right now. So maybe, here's some tea. And if you could just sit over there for the moment, that would be great, but I'm okay. And that's a whole different relationship with yourself. So this quality of listening to ourselves, to the internal chatter of these more defiled parts of ourselves, yeah, at a certain point, you want to stop listening. Or you can think about it as listening at a much deeper level. And that will imply necessarily looking to the initial wound, the real thing, the real story that's going on. So Sujat is reflecting that Dave is a very good listener and probably gets vented to a lot. It's yes, a mixed blessing, but I'm sure that people appreciate it. So you do have to find balance. Okay, it's 7:15. So despite the bit of a difficult beginning with the black screen, it's been great to see everyone. And I really appreciate these sessions. It's lovely to talk Dhamma with you all. And yeah, once again, we will be doing these live streams on Clear Mountain's YouTube channel and Facebook every Sunday morning, 10 a.m. That'll be more of a talk with Ajahn Kovilo or myself, and then Monday evenings at 6:30 p.m. And this will be the Q&A time. So everyone should take care. And yeah, good to see Jen, Jeed, great to see you, Elaine, Sharmila, I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong, and Tora. Okay, Catherine as well. Take care, everyone. Be safe.